Welcome to Let's Talk with Sherry Ann Dixon. Every week I come on here and I try to find good subjects, not subjects, the subjects that are really important to our community. And this week I'm talking to Black about depression. Why do you have to differentiate men are men and depression is depression? But, I'm not sure about that. Not sure. There are issues that these guys will talk to you about. There's a little bit of a difference in the way that they've been treated. In the mainstream society, depression and mental illness is still a taboo subject. But in the Black community, these are some of the topics that are almost completely shrouded in secrecy. Millions of Black men are suffering in silence, or they're getting the treatment only in extreme circumstances, which are like the emergency rooms, homeless shelters, prisons, and of course in mental institutions. I wrote here, the neglect of emotional disorders amongst men in the Black community is nothing less than racial suicide. So I invited some guys on my show to talk about Renee, but to talk about how they've been treated, how did they get on in with their illness. Three of them on here I have from depression, and I'll start with the first one, which is Kwame. Yes. Kwame, can you introduce yourself and tell people a little bit more about your illness and how did you recover from it?
Okay. Well, it's interesting how you've actually said it was an illness, because at the time when I was going through the experience, I didn't think it was an illness, and even though I don't think it was an illness. I don't think it was a place that I was at in terms of my own life journey. It's something which is interesting because at the time when I experienced it, I was going through a lot of extreme external stuff. You know what I mean? I had lots of money, I had invested it, I'd lost it. And that in itself compounded to being in a new environment, because I wasn't in the UK, I was in North America. That compounded, and then everything basically caused pressure. And that pressure I brought on myself because obviously I had creditors calling, wanted the money, and being who I was and still am, I just couldn't deal with the pressure at the time. And it was something, so it basically drove me into a place which was where I've never been before, and I didn't recognize it actually when I was in it. And it was only after, and I'm talking in very short here, because it's an entire story within itself, which is in my book. But it was only because of the help of my cousin, which had enabled me to come out of that particular experience. So for me, it was being in that space and not recognizing that I was in that space until somebody else had identified that I was in that space. So and like I said, I can go into more detail, but I know that we're not have a lot of time to do so. But that's it in a snippet, really, in terms of my own particular experience.
That's how your breakdown started.
That's how it started. It was external pressure.
How did it manifest itself?
It manifested itself in such a way that I became isolated. I felt isolated, funny enough, like what we do now in terms of quarantine. But I started to basically lock myself away,
To say, Courtney, you
hello.
Tell everybody about yourself, Courtney Brown.
So I'm Courtney Brown. I'm the director and founder of Father to Father organization that supports men and boys through counseling, mentoring, and coaching. I'm a father of four, 30-year-old, 25-year-old, 16-year-old, and 15-year-old, and 3 grandchildren and a beautiful wife. Married for 15 years. Last week was 15 years that we've been married together.
That's awesome.
You tried to do the show last week.
Well done.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
I tried to do the show last week, but I couldn't do it because it was your anniversary.
That's correct. Yeah.
So Courtney, tell us a little bit more about what you do and how, you know, what you're about.
Well, one of the products we have in Father to Father is something called Men Chat too. But chat is an acronym for men need to connect, men need healing, men need acknowledgement. And when I talk about acknowledgement, I mean they need to be seen. From my experience, you know, black men have been invisible um, to society. So acknowledging, I see you, brother. Yeah, I acknowledge your pain, your frustrations, your anger.
Mm.
Um, and also the T stands for men need to talk too. Why did I come to this? My own experience of depression started at the age I experienced it again, you know, and so yeah, losing my family or losing the family unit was very crucial to me because I didn't want to repeat what had happened in my mum and dad's relationship. I wanted that family unit. So it was really that for me, that really knocked me. Really knocked me. You know, I didn't, like Kwame said, I didn't go to the point of wanting suicide, but I remember clearly that I wanted to run away.
Mm.
I wanted to go to a place where nobody knew me and I could start afresh. So yeah, so that's where my my first bout of depression started, and I never really got over it. I just found a coping strategy for it, and what that coping strategy was is that I found this alter ego called Courtney Too Sweet, the promoter. So validate. Kwame's laughing because he knows. So I became this big time promoter. And you know, that's where I found my validation in that. But it was yeah, I didn't know till later it was at the detriment of hurting other people and hurting myself, to be honest with you as well. So that's
That's how it started, and you had a second breakdown, well,
yeah,
meltdown,
yeah,
at an older age,
that's correct.
and
Yeah.
that was after the father pretense for a little while. You were
So
pretending.
my second breakdown came from a point where literally was about 4 years ago. You know, and you know, I thought I was a secure person at that time. You know, I'm spiritual. I believe in the Father Almighty. I started doing, you know, God's work through Father to Father, and
Yeah.
I walked into my son's school and saw his head teacher um, having him pinned to the floor like an animal, and that triggered me. Yeah, and that triggered me. So it was depression and anxiety that I experienced there. I didn't trust nobody. When I'm going to be more specific, I didn't trust any white person at that time. You know, and I had to go through that cleansing myself through counseling and that yeah. So that one was a deep one. But to be honest with you, I feel as though, like I said, I hadn't had full closure to the first one, if that makes sense. So that's where that's them, because
So
from the first.
it didn't help you in this last.
Sorry, say that again, Sherry.
Yeah, sorry, the internet is unstable. I said because you didn't have proper closure from the first one, you were not pretending, but masking it. So
That's
the second one
correct. Yeah,
exacerbated itself
very
easier.
much. That's
Right.
it. Very true. And it's through the second one, yeah, that I did a lot more cleansing myself, went counseling, went to my childhood, dealt with some childhood traumas. You know, we talk about adverse childhood experiences, and I had to deal with that to bring me to the place where I am now. So I had to really look in myself and deal with those demons and shadows that were there. And also accept them as well, because that journey has made me who I am now.
Okay.
So that's why I talk about pain to purpose.
Pain to purpose. That's where I wanted you to get to, because I was reading about that and I didn't know how you got there. All right, I'm going to come back to you. Renee Paris is based in Guyana. Renee, you went dark. I don't know where you moved or something.
No,
'Cause
I
you were
did.
bright.
Just I believe what's going on is the change in the sunlight, or to some extent.
Okay, that's fine.
But
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 can
it
you tell us about yourself?
yeah,
And
sure.
how did you get to your pain, your break, your meltdown?
Yes. So everyone, my name is Rennie Paris. I live in New York City, but I do a lot of traveling back and forth to Guyana. So that's where I grew up, and that's where my parents are from. So you know, just taking it a step back. So in 2008, my fiance and the mother of my kids, unfortunately, she passed away. Right? You would think that that would be the point where depression would hit, but that was absolutely not the point. In fact, I went into overgear and I focused on trying to get things in place for my family, my two daughters, and I pushed and I pushed and everything, right? So I say that to kind of bring some context to it because the triggers are different for everyone,
Yeah,
right? That can be a trigger for someone, but
yeah,
for whatever reason, that was not a trigger for me. And that obviously is a very traumatic experience, right? So now let's bring it a little bit more in the closer to the present. 2017, as I was speaking with, I was sharing this with Sharianne. 2017 was a very eventful year for me. I was in Guyana at the time doing a business trip. Well, actually, no, 2016, I left corporate America. I was in corporate America for about 15 years or so in the finance and investment field. Worked at some major investment banks, JP Morgan, worked for S&P, doing a lot of different things there. So I decided to leave in 2016 to start my own business in Guyana, right? Very excited, started it with a few folks, very gung ho, everything. My first, I would say, 2 to 3 years, it was like getting punched in the face. Mike Tyson has a very famous quote, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. And that's
mm,
exactly how I felt. I was just getting punched and punched and punched in the mouth. And I literally felt as though I made like an egregious error here in leaving my cushiony job, nice pay, very predictable salary. And I had invested some funds for a rainy day, and then that ended up being a scheme that someone that I knew that literally just took my money. So that was like whatever nest egg at the time I thought I had, that was obliterated, right? So 2017, my nest egg that I was invested in, that's gone. So I'm literally trying to scramble for funds. Um, got a call from Wharton. I'd applied to Wharton Business School later on in 2016. I got accepted, which was very good. Definitely wanted to go. That was around my birthday time, which I was so excited about. I was in Guyana at the time on a business trip, 2017 in March, and maybe about a week or so after that, I went through a very abrupt breakup because I was at the time in a relationship, and it was very abrupt. I've never experienced that in my life, being with someone and then all of a sudden, boom. So I took that very hard because it didn't have that closure. And for me, with me going through the financial issues, now I have school, and it's like, okay, congratulations, you're going to this a great school. Oh yeah, by the way, in a couple of weeks, we're going to inundate you with a ton of work. School hasn't even started yet, but you have like tremendous amount of work, which I expected. But for me, going through that at that time was very difficult. And I'll give you an example of one night where I literally went through a panic attack. I've never experienced that in my life. I was literally up the whole night. My bones were hurting. I was shaking. I was sweating. I couldn't sleep. And I felt like I was literally like, I don't know if I was going to have a heart attack or whatever it was. And I was literally there the whole night. I was crying. I didn't know what the hell was going on. I couldn't focus. I tried to read my textbook. That wasn't happening. And I was just singing. I remember I was just singing this one song over and playing it and singing it over again. Hallelujah song. You know, whatever, why that song came to me, I was just singing that. So, um, you know, so that kind of really hit me. I didn't know what was really going on, but me being a type A person, I'm always looking to push myself. So I pushed myself starting into school. And for a few months, it went very well. You know, I started back working out and, you know, things went very well in a sense, but then the financial situations just kept killing me. And then for me, having my two kids, I'm worried about them, providing for them and everything. And then it just got so bad at one time that I didn't even have money to like take the Amtrak train to go to school at one time. Just to get to school was a blessing in itself, just to have enough funds just to get to school. And I'm here with these folks, and obviously these folks are from all walks of life, and they who's not this person and that person enjoying themselves. And I'm like, I'm not having fun here. This is horrible. Like I can't enjoy this experience. I just stopped paying attention to school. I started isolating myself, and you know, I just by myself, and then I just didn't want anything to do with anyone. I remember one of my classmates, he'd actually got me a job, well, helped me in terms of with the interview process, all that stuff, and I got the job, and I was doing amazing in the job. I was just kicking behind, you know, I was doing really good. And one morning, I showered and I had my clothes on, ready to go to work. And I just sat on the bed for whatever reason and then I don't know if I was putting on my shoes or whatever. And I just literally couldn't get up from the bed. I was just there sitting and so afraid of just going outside. I couldn't find myself going outside. So I literally sent an email to one of my colleagues and say, I can't come in today. And then she was like, oh, okay. When can you come in? I was like, I don't know. And I stayed at home for 10 days straight. I was just ordering Chinese food and just like, you know, whatever. And then one of my classmates actually had a wedding. I believe it was in North Carolina or whatever the case is. And I booked my hotel and everything. I was gung ho, ready to go. And I literally just stayed home for 10 days. I didn't answer any calls. I didn't do anything. And I was just there in a state of just utter depression, just if anything happened to me there, it's fine with me. Just end it. Like that's just how I felt. Um, Coming towards the end of that, I said I had to do something. So I reached out. I sent an email to the vice chair of the school saying that I need to speak with her. Scared out my behind. Don't know how she's gonna react. But she was just amazing. Peggy, shout out to Peggy Bishop. She's just amazing. She was so supportive. She was able to help me with get me in contact with someone at the school, Professor Akurloff, who was really good in helping me just express myself. He was just asking the right questions. I can tell he knew what it was, you know, while I was trying to get through it. So I took a break from school, and to try to work on that, I did some sessions with some therapy therapists, and it was just really just speaking it through talk therapy and just getting a feel for this new thing here. Because for me and in my family, we don't speak about this, and even in the Black family, it's a stigma, right? So so yeah, so I know there's a lot more that we have to talk about there. I'll end there. Um, and you know, we can go forward from there, but that's kind of my experience with depression.
Thank you, Renee, for sharing your story. Obviously, you know, we'll come back, but I wanted people to hear men talking for real about their stories, not just oh, it's gone on for years, something that might just happen there and then. In all three cases, it just sort of crept up on you because of incidences, finance, or, you know, a personal issue understand that people don't walk around forever and ever just feeling so depressed. Sometimes it just happens. Stuff just happens. I didn't want to move on to talk to Viv. I always get his surname wrong. I always say it wrong, and he tells me off each time. Um, Viv Ahu. You see, he's laughing. So put your mic on. I can't hear you.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Tell me how to say it properly again.
Amun.
Well, the A there, no, I
Amun.
don't pronounce the H. Amun. Okay, Amun. Say it properly for the rest of the show. I spoke to Viv because he doesn't suffer from depression, but works with organizations that are trying to cope and help young men well, not specifically, but young men particularly with overcoming these issues. And I know that he's working with Courtney, but Viv, you tell people about yourself and what you're about.
Oh, well, thanks for having me on, Sherry, and also thanks for picking this topic. I think it's timely on the back of the COVID-19 lockdowns that we've all been experiencing globally, and also in some ways even more significantly the George Floyd well, I'm going to call it a saga because it's ongoing. It's not an event. In fact, the court case in relation to the officers won't begin maybe until maybe November or even March of next year. So this is an ongoing issue. And they've just released the body cam of the police officer. So you get to see what happened from the very moment they pulled him over in his car. And it is a traumatizing experience to watch.
Yes,
it is a triggering experience to watch for Black people, but for any person with even a scintilla of humanity. So I think it's really important time.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's a really, really important time to be having these kinds of conversations. So thank you for that. I trained as a psychotherapist many, many years ago. And I practiced for about 11 years. And I'm one of those individuals, whatever I get into, I deep dive it. So I was on the probation board, London probation board for 5 years. That allowed me to go into pretty much any of the institutions, prisons and so on and so forth, and engage with and work with some pretty serious individuals. I also spent some time doing relationship counseling, which was really useful. It didn't help me in my marriage, but I've been able to help many other individuals. I also worked for a period of time with pedophiles and also young people who had been, the victims of pedophiles and pedophile rings and so on. So a real spectrum, a real range. Now, my association with Father to Father and other organizations, which Father to Father is an amazing organization, by the way. I was just reading some the results of some consultation with some of the people that have been involved in the Father to Father initiatives, which maybe I'll touch on later on. But let me just get to the main bit, the headlines first, and then unpick them afterwards. I think the most important thing for everybody to understand is that forms of depression are as common as the common cold globally. In terms of dis-ease experienced globally, it's probably like number 4. So all of us, or the vast majority of us, are going to experience some form of depression at some point in our lives. It might be mild, it might be temporary, it might be as a result of a relationship breakdown, or somebody, the passing of a relative or a friend, or a catastrophe. People might experience a mild depression as a consequence of a car crash. I mean, I wrote my car off recently and I was depressed about it. I really love that car. So it's really important to understand that this is not something that happens to very few people, weak people. And so therefore it's something that if you experience it, you shouldn't talk about or acknowledge. It's something that the majority of people are going to experience at some point in their lives. So I think that's the first point I want to get across. When we talk about Black people now, that's really interesting because the statistics, the only statistics that are available talk about the disproportionality. So it talks about how more susceptible we are to depression, to mental health related issues, schizophrenia, and so on. There's an abundance of statistical data talking about how vulnerable we are to these things. But there isn't any data really out there that talks about why that might be the case. That's lacking. So we talk about the data poverty when it comes down to why we might be disproportionately represented in psychiatric units and so on and so forth. Now, when you do deep dive this stuff, what you come up against very quickly is racism, historical racism, colonialism, and many of these historical injustices that have continued to play out in our communities, whether it be in the Caribbean, whether it be on the African continent, whether it be in North America, South America, or the UK. That's also very important, that we understand that as a community, as a collective, let's say global Africans, for want of a better term, we've been subjected to extremely traumatic experiences, abuse, injustices for centuries that have begun to shift and shape our very DNA. That's a really important point for the listeners to take on board. And in the wake of this George Floyd scandal, the research to substantiate what I've been saying is beginning to come out as mainstream research. So white institutions and organizations acknowledging that racism has literally driven us mad at critical points in our experience as a global community.
Why men? Why men? Why?
Oh, well,
why,
you see, you right.
Yeah, why men?
This is a pause for effect, by the way.
This.
Because, and I don't want to deviate from this main topic, but we're living in a patriarchal global society. So the attacks, the war, the oppression has been between one set of men and another set of men.
Yeah.
So if we talk about slavery in North America as a good example, because America, is the most dominant country. So people tend to know more about what's happened in America than anywhere else. So people will know about George Floyd in the UK, but not know about individuals who have suffered the same injustice and maybe just around the corner from them, such as the media machine. So we know that in America, Black men were lynched, serially in their thousands in order to keep them submissive and keep them servile and passive. It was a form of terrorism, it's a form of domestic terrorism that had a psychological impact on them. And it's because the oppressor, the white man, wanted to ensure the oppressed, the Black men, kept in their place. And they also perpetuate, because psychology, as we understand it, is a white form of psychology. And again, it was created to perpetuate this idea that Black people, Black men in particular, were inferior and less adequate and less human. Now, all of this propaganda has found its way into mainstream narratives, mainstream stories and concepts and beliefs that even the Black men themselves have begun to believe over centuries. So you talk about a very deep seat, when you talk about depression and some of the signs, you talk about a lack of self-esteem, a lack of self-belief. These, are racialized narratives that we experience to a greater degree when they talk about imposter syndrome. And Courtney working in the House of Commons and so on, he would have felt more insecure than his young white male equivalent who was just uncomfortable about coming into a new place for the first time because he was black. So that's a really simple way of saying that, if, you know, the racism is being played out against black men primarily, and you know, some of the Black Psychology Institute of Black Psychology talks about why black women mums have been so hard on their black boys historically, and why they developed that, and it was in an effort to keep their boys safe. They didn't want the boy to make eye contact with the white male. They wanted him to not look at the white woman. They wanted to not talk out of term. So they wanted to break their boy in the home so that he would remain alive when he was out in the wider community. So, you know, again, it's a very complex and deep issue.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about it in a very generalized way because it's sensitive to many people. I'm sure many of your callers will say, oh, why is he saying this and why is he saying that? But the information is widely available if people just choose to Google it.
No, but I want, it's not that I'm looking for the, I'm looking for the messages. Linian, wow, we got a lot of them.
But I wanted to start with the broadest possible context first. And the historical context for people, because too often what happens is, it's like when we're on mainstream platforms, you know, CNN, ITV, whatever, everything's a soundbite. And people think they get information, but they haven't really, because they don't understand the wider context that their experience, their individual experience is playing out in.
Somebody said to me, and that's a good point that you brought up. Somebody said to me when I was talking about this, people don't realize how much black men have been oppressed, not only by their white society out there. You know, if they have to go out in a car, they have to worry about, are they going to get arrested? Are they going to get to their journey at the other end? And none of this has anything to do with the driving part of getting to the other end. It's about the fact that another white man might pick on them, or policemen might pick on them, more so in the last year. I think, well, more so since we've been seeing a lot of these videos of policemen oppressing black men, and so therefore a lot more stories are coming out about how they're being oppressed in that way in modern times, and that's one form of depression. But then somebody's going to say, but what's that got to do with these three guys here who said that they just felt, because you know that's what they're saying, they're thinking, where's he gone off on that? Why can't he just talk about these guys feeling depressed and what did they do? Courtney, maybe you can help me out on that. How do you explain to somebody listening what, as Viv said, got to do with what you're going through?
Okay, so I'm head of student engagement for a secondary school in Hackney. And why I say Hackney in London, because the whole borough is doing something around improving the outcomes of young black men in education and in mental health. Now, let's look at, so one of the things I learned about while, you know, sitting on the head teacher steering group, and what they're looking at is something called racial identity and trauma. And post-traumatic slave syndrome. Remember, this is the whole of Hackney, black, white, everybody looking at this and what the research says. So that's Dr. Janet Helms. So if anybody wants to go and go up and look at about racial identity, and Dr. Joy Degree around post-traumatic slave syndrome. Yeah, and that's why it's important. That's why what Viv is talking about, the historical, brings us to where we are now. When we're talking about trauma, and what we as a community, Africans, went through slavery without any counseling and and therapy, but brought up to now. So I remember listening, I think it was T.G. Jakes I think I was listening to, and he was talking about when 9/11 happened, people were actually watching it who are getting counseling for that now, let alone the people that were on the ground. So So my thought process is like, wait a minute, some people are watching. What about those that lived in you know, when we talk about post-traumatic slave syndrome, people that have lived it with no counseling, no therapy, then we're set, you know, we're set free. But then how do we heal as a community from that? If there's been no counseling, no therapy, no acknowledgement, no listening, that whole thing. And that's what I picked up from my therapy, that, you know, the actual listening, understanding the context. So if I look at my organization, Father to Father, and look at my dad, for instance, and me witnessing, and let me get this clear first. I love my dad. So let's not get this twisted. I'm just talking about a child when I was young and what I witnessed. Domestic abuse, the mental health, drugs and alcohol. So that's what I went through. But then when I started asking about his journey, his lived experiences, I found out about the beatings he got in Jamaica from his uncle. Yeah. I found out about my granddad, who left to go and find a better way of living to provide for his family. All of these things is what my dad grew up in. Then he came to England in the 70s, where it's racist. So then he had to fight the police, the mods and everything. And then when he was defending himself, we're gonna lock him up and start injecting him. Because there was no talking therapy for black men then. It was just that, you know what, let's lock him up and inject him. So this is why I hear, I hope I'm explaining it properly, but this is what my journey has been. And for a lot of other men, the journey has been. So I think we have to look at the historical context and bring it full and work with it from there. I hope that I've explained that well.
See, I'm hearing. No, you did, because I know some people who have been in this situation. I'm not one of those who are just gonna say, well, what were they doing that meant that they got locked up? Or surely there are lots of black men in the community doing all right and they don't get in this trouble. I know that's what some people say. I know it because I hear it. And so, and then I can see some personal questions. People saying, well, what's that got, the historical side of it, got to do with somebody like Renee? Renee has not experienced the on his head, but he suffers from depression. How did you get to that stage and how did you cope, Renee?
What was the last part? I missed the last part.
The internet is cutting out a lot. What I'm saying is that the people in England, the guys in England, are talking about historical things, about racism and being pushed back and kept back and having to deal with the white oppression. Did you have that? Do you think that some of that caused your lack of self-belief? Because sometimes that's what depression comes from, lack of self-belief.
Yeah, so I actually shared an experience with my incoming cohort, because I'm starting back school now, my last year, of my experience growing up in Brooklyn. And I was 16 at the time, coming home from playing table tennis. And all of a sudden, an unmarked car, just out of nowhere, with 4 white men, just popped up. It's about 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock, and just literally just pulled their guns on us. So I'm thinking that I'm about to get kidnapped and this may be the end of it, right? Like that is literally the first thing that's going through my mind, right? So it's fight or flight, right? So I'm gonna fly. I'm gonna run. So as I'm starting to run, one of them grabs my hand and then shows a badge and says, "Why are you running? Don't you see that we are the police?" I said, "Police?" I said, "I thought you were gonna kill me. You had your guns out. I thought I was gonna be kidnapped." The last thing on my mind is saying that thinking that you're the police. especially how everything just transpired. So I say that to say, so when I shared that with my class, they were literally stunned, a bunch of them, because obviously, you know, they never experienced that, to the point where one classmate literally wrote something to his clients and his employees that he manages, and because he owns a company, stating that, you know what, I need to take more of an active role in this, because you know, someone in my class, like I didn't even realize, is like experiencing this stuff. You know, so one second, there's a bee.
I know.
So
Bees.
I came outside for more lighting, and then so every time you see me, think it's that bee, that's annoying bee. But anyways, so so yeah, so that was a traumatic experience, and obviously I had my issues, you know, navigating that, growing up in New York City, and you know, not having, not coming from a family where it is okay to express yourself. Especially as men, we're not really encouraged to express ourselves, right? Men don't cry, tough it up, you know, come on, you're a man. But then what happens is you see, oh, in the news, this person who didn't domestic violence, or who didn't kill his wife, or who didn't do this, or just went berserk, and you're like, this guy is crazy. Well, really, is he really crazy, or maybe he's just going through so many different things, and then this is a trigger, and he doesn't know how to cope and handle it, because we never really encourage men to do it. And I was victim of it, and to some degree, I'm still trying to work myself through that, because for me, it's easy to isolate myself from people than to allow people to, you know, kind of you know, see what's going on with me. So all of that, I say all of that because I am familiar with Dr. Joy DeGrew's work. I am familiar with her work, slave traumatics, post-traumatic slave syndrome. I recommend that book to anyone. You don't have to. Yes, please, I recommend that book. So I definitely see the connection, right? Some people may say, oh yeah, that's an excuse. No. It is good to understand. And I kind of give this comparative, this analogy here, right? I love our Jewish brothers and sisters. One of the reasons why is they never forget the Holocaust.
Right.
They never forget the Holocaust. I remember my daughter at the time, she was in the first grade, and her classmate was clearly describing to me the Holocaust as though she was there. She was 6 years old. And the reason why they never forget is because, first of all, they don't want it to be repeated. They honor their ancestors, and they know the impact it has on them. So like us, you know, we're not forgetting it. We know we have to study it to see how it's impacting us today so that we could improve going forward. That bee again. Yeah. So I think the bee wants to be a part of the conversation. So
get up and beat the bee, laugh it. It's all right. I've got fly spray here too, because I know it always happens.
Oh, you know what? I think there's like a hole in the door, and I think the bee lives there. So maybe I'm intruding.
That's what happened in the Caribbean, man.
Well, Kwame, while Ray's trying to sort of be, can I move Kwame? Kwame, you could tell us a little bit more about how did you cope? How did you get over your how did you do you?
Yeah.
How are you where you are today? And you've written a book about this subject.
Yeah, because it's interesting because what Courtney and Viv have said, alluded to, is exactly what I did in terms of self-therapy, which I didn't know what I was doing at the time. I had the opportunity, based on the experiences that I was going through, living in North America, losing a lot of money, having a relationship breakdowns and everything else around that. And this was about 2000, sometime in the early 2000s. But the ex-girlfriend that I actually had, she encouraged me to take a trip to Africa. Now, what Viv and Courtney have said is so true, because I didn't know at the time what that what kind of impact that would have on me in terms of me being an African Caribbean person. So, and I'm gonna take the opportunity to now to read a snippet from out of the book in terms of what happened on that experience that I had. I went to Ghana and I went to Cape Coast. Now that's one of the enslavement forts where our ancestors were held. And the experience that I had then made me realize, like Viv said, that it's a source, it starts somewhere. Now take, for example, what had happened to families, our ancestors at the time, was that it wasn't all cuddly and nice. The women and the children were put into one cell and the men were put into another cell. That meant that the families had to be broken right then and there. On top of that, the men wanted to protect their families naturally. That's a natural human instinct. But because we were being disempowered, the men were put in a situation where they couldn't protect their women, and they couldn't afford to break down in front of their women. You understand? So yeah. That inability to express and to open up, I believe, in terms of my own self-therapy, started somewhere. So it's in our DNA. So I believe it started there when the families are torn apart, and the impact of that emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually was such a way that we're still living it to this day. Even the Caribbean, in terms of the brutalization of our women, right? It's so apparent in how men behave towards women in the Caribbean in that regard. So anyway, let me just take a few minutes to read from my book, if I can, right? It's not gonna be long. All right, so this is my trip to Cape Coast. One of our first trips was to the Cape Coast enslavement fort, a whitewashed building on the Ghanaian coastline with parapets that overlook the beach and town. Our guide told us that from the parapets we could see in the distance the crucifix spires of 3 churches. And for sure, when we ventured to the top of the fort and looked over the town, we saw the churches and the spires, clearly against the bright blue sky, along with hundreds of people living within the city. Within myself, I found it ironic that those who professed to follow the Christ and supposedly loved their fellow man allowed a cruel crime of humongous proportions to take place right in their view, or better yet, under their noses. What did that say about them and their religion? I was extremely puzzled. We climbed down steps and made our way into the dungeon below the fort, and there I experienced another phenomenal spiritual moment that has stayed with me to this day. It was dark and foreboding, with a single bulb hanging from a wire, its light bouncing from the walls and the rocky roof, causing shadows to flit against the craggy walls. The atmosphere was stifling, and I felt I had been bundled in with another few hundred people, many of whom I never knew, into a room made of many less than that number. I felt the spirits calling me, and I was without a doubt affected by their presence, their deafening silence embracing me. I was sure there was an effect on the others too, since most of us, when we emerged into the beautiful daylight, were crying. Once in the dungeon, our tour guide showed us a rough line running parallel to the floor. He then showed us a window slit, no bigger than 1 foot high and about half that wide, high up on the uneven wall. Naturally, within the dungeon, daylight could barely be seen. He then explained that because the land on the outside was level with the bottom of the slit, anytime rain fell, the water made its way into the cell. Imagine hundreds of people packed in a space made for much less than that, feces, urine, rainwater, grime, all swilling underfoot, knee-high or waist-high, even shoulder-high. And this in a confined, heat-suffocating place. I cried. We made our way out to the ground floor. Nothing needed to be said by any of us. Once there, we stood by the dungeon entrance, and right beside it was another large door, wooden door. A huge padlock secured it. I was curious and decided to force it ajar as far as I was able to. I was dumbstruck. A stench assaulted my nose that would stay with me forever, and I still remain to this day unable to describe. When I asked the guide why the room was locked, he said that they, the caretakers or custodians of the fort, were unable to clean it. That's right. They were incapable of getting it cleaned. I was silenced. Here was a room which, after hundreds of years, was still unable to be scrubbed. I repeat, imagine after hundreds of years, there was still a room that they were unable to scour of the blood, tears, perspiration, excrement, effluent, and death to the time when we visited in 2006. So that, for me, And that's I'm just, like I said, that's an excerpt. But what it showed me was that as an African Caribbean man, what we had to endure in order to protect our families is why we're displaying particular things today. So when we are impacted upon by external influences, for example, or even internal, we tend to retreat into a space or into a place we don't even know that we're going into, because, like I said, it's all connected. And as I alluded to already, Courtney and Viv have said it so magnificently in terms of there's a connection, there's a source, it started somewhere. And that's where I actually fell into without even knowing it. So how I came out of it, like I said, I was blessed to have my cousin Ibn, who I saw that I wasn't behaving normally, quote unquote, and she was the one who basically highlighted it to me. And then what she encouraged me to do was to go to a black bookshop to read black books, which I wasn't doing at the time. And it so happened that I was able to re-educate myself, relearn about who I am as an African Caribbean man from Jamaica, and understand who I am as that individual, what it means to be a man in that regard. So that means I can always express how I'm feeling. I can always express how I'm feeling vulnerable and everything else without feeling as I need to protect that, you know? But like I said, because of the societal layers that have caused us to be where we are afraid to get from remove the mask or get from behind the facade, is to why when we get into a particular place, it's difficult for us to express. So I was able to do that, and plus I have an advantage. I'm a writer, so I'm able to express through poetry, through stories, through empowering and empowering myself through verse and word that enabled me to heal in that regard. But I also had therapy too, which I also went to counseling from my ex, who had referred me onto, because when I was going through my stuff and I approached her and I said, well, listen, because even though I had done work on myself, I knew I hadn't done enough. And I said to her, listen, I need help. So I had to humble myself and go to her and say, listen, I need help. I don't know what it is, why I'm going through what I'm going through. I've done a lot of work on myself, but there's still stuff that I'm dealing with. Can you help me? And she was the one who referred me to counseling. And that enabled me to get to where I am today. And as Courtney had said before, everything that we've probably been through, or more like been through, has made us who we are today, and being able to help other people to do the same as what we're doing right now.
Perfect. So, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kwame. I wanted you to get there because I know when you told me you were writing the book, and then when the book came out, I just didn't understand why specifically we were talking about Black men and depression until a friend of mine went through it, and then I got it. I want to ask this question too. It's by Angela Barrows on Facebook. She says, what would the guest suggest to initially encourage Black men who feel they cannot be open about their feelings, not being able to ask for help, and not dealing with the uncomfortable thoughts and feelings? Maybe Courtney, you can comment there.
Yeah, one thing I've learned is how I engage with Black men is to be vulnerable and transparent. I've got this saying now that nobody can chat me because I chat myself. I put it out there, transparent and vulnerable. Yeah, because I'm owning my shadow. I'm owning my demons, you know, and I'm putting it out there. So to answer that question, I think Black men own it, you know. I've got something written down here, actually, disclosure, talking about it and opening it up is powerful. So disclosure, have that discussion with safe people, find organizations that are culturally competent, that has empathy, compassion. Yeah, that's what I say. And, you know, there's many organizations out there. So, you know, just do the research. And then I think the final thing that we haven't talked about, and you know, me and Viv talk about it all the time, is that drive change. If we have to either be at the table, don't have people talk about us if we're not at that table. And if you ain't at that table, create your table. That's why I created Father to Father. That's why I talk about, you know, pain to purpose. Yeah. And Kwame said it. How can I, from what I've gone through, how can I be a servant leader to everybody else? How can I have compassion and empathy for everybody else? And I liked what Renee said earlier on about understanding, because it wasn't until I understood my dad's journey and what he had gone through that I could find forgiveness for my dad and find forgiveness for myself and move forward. So,
yeah, I get that one. I get that one, particularly about forgiveness. If you don't, first of all, it's understanding what the pain is and then speaking the pain, speaking it to the person. We don't have to yell and carry on and behave and cuss out. You just have to have the conversation. And from that conversation, somebody might understand your pain, your journey as well. And then you can forgive each other. So, Viv, I need to ask you this question. Somebody wrote me privately and said, what is the bit about every time a Black man gets in trouble? It's saying my internet is unstable. Every time a Black man gets in trouble, I'm talking more about in the UK, Viv, because I don't know if it's the same in the Caribbean. They end up putting them in place where they're drugged up all the time. There's a vast amount of Black male suicides. The figures, I can't get the total figures, but it's more than the average in the Caribbean, and probably the same in America, because they are put on medication first before therapy sometimes. Have you got anything that you can tell us about that?
I'd like to hit 3 key points really quickly, because I know you're coming to the end. We are overdiagnosed and disproportionately sectioned because the institutions want to control us, and they are frightened of us. It's the same reason why we're disproportionately excluded from school. You know, the people that educate us don't understand us. So if a young Black man who may be 13 years of age but 6'2" stands up and says he's not happy, that white female teacher from the Midlands is only going to see a Black man who she's been conditioned to believe is the bogeyman. And so the system will always overreact in terms of how it addresses Black men, whether it's shooting them 20 times in the street, strangling them to death 8 minutes and 46 seconds, or excluding them from school, when if it was a white male counterpart, it may well have been just a mild reprimand. But I think I don't want to get back into the institutional piece again, because obviously we've addressed that already. There are a couple of very simple things I want people to understand, and Courtney's already picked up on that. Prevention is better than cure. So as we've already discussed, understanding the broader context is really important. And then it gets down to your own personal practices and habits that then build resilience. There's a thing called the 5 ways model. It's known all over the world. It's been well researched, and people can Google that and pull down on it. But I want to touch on them very quickly. 5 key points. First one is about being connected. So talking and listening. Courtney's already made reference to that. Getting into the habit of talking your pain, and also listening to the pain and the experiences of those around you, your children, your partner, your colleagues. During COVID-19, the piece of work I've been doing as part of the Open Mind Alliance, which is a Black specific mental health and well-being network, and Courtney is a part of, what we noticed that there were a number of Black male closed groups springing up on WhatsApp and so on and so forth, specifically to talk through their stuff, share information, and get the support that they require. That's great, because what it does is it's following on from the research that shows that Black men don't lean into anything that requires them to disclose their personal stuff. They don't do one-to-one therapy. And there was an initiative that was established recently called Black Minds Matter, offering free counseling to Black people in the community. 90% of the individuals that took up the offer were Black women. So we know that Black men don't do one-to-one therapy, but they'll do group talk. Yeah. They'll do a chat in the barbershop. Yeah? They'll do a chat after a football game. You understand? They'll even go out in the corridor in a club and they will talk. They're in the car park, in the car. So what's happening, what we're seeing now is naturally these support groups are springing up. Courtney's got a very powerful one. Then there are a number of others out there like Dope Black Dads. And I know they exist globally. So getting back into these reasoning circles that are a part of our tradition anyway is a very important one. Keep learning. And part of this session today has been a learning session. We've touched on some really important points, some books and some signposting. It's your responsibility to go and follow up on that information and take your own learning in, because it will protect you and your family. Be active. When people who are locked down, who've become even more sedentary, are become more vulnerable to depression and anxiety and so on and so forth. So be active. Go and buy the bicycle. Go for those long walks or the runs. Go and play with the children. Give is one of the big ones. Be a giver. Share, and what you'll get back will be tenfold, 100-fold of what you gave.
True.
And then the last one is to take notice. It's the little things that matter. We know this. But too often when we're caught up in the fact that we lost that big job and we got rejected for this, we forget how pleasurable it is for us to, for me, it's my granddaughter coming in at 6:30 a.m. in the morning. It's the most powerful thing I experience for that day, and I drink it in. Yeah, it's called the 5 ways model. Don't ever allow yourself to get isolated. Continue to take in fresh information and learning, and be around people that stimulate you. Be active physically, right? Give, right? Because we always have something to give. And take notice of what's around you. I want you to be out in the garden because it's beautiful. I've got the green in front of me. You lot can't see it, but I've got the green behind me and I've got the breeze. Okay? And that's what I'm noticing right now. The 5 ways model.
I like that. I really like that, Viv. Thank you so much for that. I want... I know Courtney's, I can see him write it down. He's got lots of things he wants to say. But what can we do? This is from Janice Chesney, right here in Guyana. What can we do as wives and partners to spot depression and get men to speak to us about it? Should they be speaking to us? What can we do? Maybe Viv, you can start and then we can go around.
Leadership, starts with your own practice. So, for example, nobody around me smokes because I don't smoke.
Right.
Everybody around me trains because I train. So we have to lead by example is the point I'm trying to make. And service leadership is the most important aspect of that. So we know, and again, it's part of our own bastardization. If my woman is constantly at me to do stuff, I'm not necessarily going to pick that up. But if I see her getting on and doing it, and benefiting from it, and she's sharing that with me, then I'm more likely to get on board with it. If she's presenting me with the information and giving me access to the information so that I can get on board, I'm more likely to get on board with it. I always say to people, you have to do for self first. You have to do for self. You can present it to people, but you can't force them to eat it. So that's the starting point. Put it around them, put the books around them. Let them watch the YouTube stuff playing while they're coming in the room, and they will pick it up. And then, in 2 weeks from now, they'll be talking it like they were telling you. They're bringing it to you. Right? So practice it first, and people around you will pick it up.
Like that.
Yeah, that
Like that.
That is so important. Sorry, go ahead.
Right.
I just wanted to add a little bit to what you said. That is so important, the practicing. And I would say second is the approach. Approach is key. And I know, Viv, you touched that a little bit, but for me personally, and I'll speak personally, the best way for me to tune you out is to start coming at me, yelling, and just saying that, this is what's affecting you and your tone and everything. I will listen to nothing that you have to say. It does not matter. That's the best way to tune me out, for me to tune you out. However, if your approach comes in terms of, hey, you know what, I'm looking at this thing. I would love to get your views on it, your opinion. I know it's a little new or whatever it is. It has to do with men and depression, I know, or whatever it is. And just to kind of bring it into like an educational, it's a bonding experience. You guys can discuss it. It's almost as though you have like a devotional, like you have like some devotional time or whatever. You can talk about it. You can learn from it. Like that approach. And it may not work 100% in the beginning, but as you do that and guys see that, you know, that they can kind of add something to it, then they may start adding things and they may start actually realizing things for themselves just by talking it through and you listening to them, right? So the approach is so important. And as wives and girlfriends, I mean, you know your spouses and whatever it is very well. So you know in terms of how you approach that person. And just be caring and listening. Just when a guy actually decides to speak at whatever time, just listen. Like, just listen, really. Like, forget about everything else that's going on with you and just listen. Because if a guy is speaking with you at that time, that means something big is going on. And the moment you start putting whatever it is that your needs are and whatever the case is, that's it. We're just going to go back into our shells. And that may not come up again until a year from now, 6 months from now, or whatever the case is.
Can I go next?
Thank you, Renee.
Courtney.
Courtney next, right?
Yeah, it's funny because I've got an acronym called PLACES. So the P is be patient with your man. Be patient. You know, especially when especially when you see the behavior, there's something going on. So I always have to say, emotions drive behavior. Emotions drive behavior.
Yeah.
So if you see a behavior that is not be patient with him. Yeah. Then the L is to, as Renee said, listen. Active listening. Yeah. The A is acknowledge. When your man is speaking to you, acknowledge his pain, his frustrations, acknowledge it. Yeah. The C is to communicate. And again, it's effective communicating. So again, when he's talking, don't start talking over him. Yeah. Let him finish talking. Yeah. Because when you start talking and he's not finished, you was already processing something to say.
Hey,
yeah. So communicate. E, empathy. And the S, let's be solution focused. And when you're being, talk about what we can do together.
Right.
So that's what I have.
You know why I'm smiling as you said that? Because obviously I've been in that situation, and I remember saying, but I heard that before, you said it before. Because sometimes when people are depressed, they say things over and over again, don't they? And I remember saying, but you told me that last week, and you told me that before. And so therefore, we, the women on the other side, maybe need to learn also how to deal with our men who are going through depression. I totally get that one, because I can put my hands up and say, listen, I didn't have the time, or I just felt that the person was just using that as an excuse to get away with just being in a bad mood all the time. You know, the things we need to learn. On that point, ladies, we've had, and there's a lot of ladies in here, but I'm grateful for, okay, there's a few questions in here, guys. You're gonna have to go back, because our internet was going up and down. I have to apologize for the Caribbean, but then I do have the sun, so that helps with some bit of the question. But if you could go back, I'm sure that Janice is talking to Viv, because I think that he went a little bit quiet at that point. She says, what's the word for the acronym?
Acronym.
So if you, somebody's put places in there. But if you can go back into the live feed when you guys finish, and maybe just answer a few questions if you can. it would be helpful because our internet wasn't stable all the time. But I am really, really grateful that you guys have said yes to this discussion because
You're not gonna ask me, Jerry?
huh?
You're not gonna ask me. I was gonna add to what
I forget about you. I forgot. I did. Maybe. All
well,
right, let's go back to you.
yeah. No, I was just gonna say, I concur with Renee, Viv, and Courtney, because one of the things that I've seen when I've done a lot of workshops and seminars is that men tend to approach me because of the book, right? They tend to approach because they've seen someone who's actually talking about his experience and sharing that. And I also had a number of women buy the book for their men. So I just wanted to share that in that regard. So the book is My Day with Depression. I'll have the book launch on the 6th of September. So that's going to be a virtual book launch. But so I just want to add and enhance what Courtney, Viv, and Renee actually said in terms of what they have said.
It'd be good if women bought that as well, so they leave it on the table, like Courtney said, or
yeah, exactly.
Have the video. Hopefully you'll do that as well. But guys, I have to go. I don't want to, but it's a discussion I wanted to have because I've been there before. I've been in that situation where somebody's been depressed, and it's very hard as a woman to know what to do. So I answer some of the questions. I hope that these guys help. So thank you so much, Kwame.
Thank you,
McPherson. He talks to me rough on Facebook. on Facebook.
I would love man.
When you're putting out the portion, I did get you. I said I would get you. Thank you so much. And Viv, thank you for I know we couldn't go as deep as you normally would go, but at least I think that you brought it out for people to think about where Black men have gone, or some of the issues that we, even as women, should think about on the history of the Black man. I think that maybe some of us might be a bit more deep than saying, you tell me that last week, we will try. Renee, thank you so much for sharing your personal story. Thank you so much. And
you're welcome.
You, of course, I've known forever and ever, when you was young. And I'm glad to see that you've grown into taking Father to Father. It's all the W's, fathertofather.co.uk. And we will come back to this.
Yes, please do.
I think, it's something we should. Maybe we'll get men and women together, depression for both, but maybe so people can understand the difference for the two species. I was about to say species, man and woman. Thank you so much.